Texas has long stood at the crossroads of drug trafficking routes between the United States and Mexico, making it a fertile ground for some of the most dangerous and influential drug kingpins in history. These criminal masterminds built sprawling empires by exploiting the state's vast borders, corrupting law enforcement, and using brutal violence to maintain control. From cartel leaders with international ties to ruthless gang lords running operations from within U.S. prisons, Texas's narco history is steeped in bloodshed, intimidation, and immense profit. These kingpins didn't just move narcotics, they reshaped entire communities, fostered fear, and influenced local and international law enforcement efforts. Their reach extended beyond drugs into human trafficking, arms smuggling, and political corruption. Figures like Juan Raul Garza, Edgar Valdez Villarreal, and others used Texas as a key hub in their criminal enterprises, blending American resources with Mexican cartel brutality. Their reigns were marked by cunning strategies and ruthless enforcement, leaving behind a legacy of violence and fear. Understanding these drug kingpins offers a chilling glimpse into the underworld power structures that have left a lasting scar on Texas history and the broader war on drugs. This is the story of their rise, dominance, and eventual fall. Number 3. The Life and Crimes of Edgar Valdez Villarreal, La Barbie. Edgar Valdez Villarreal, known by his infamous nickname La Barbie, carved out a place for himself in the violent world of Mexican drug trafficking, becoming one of the few U.S. citizens to rise to power within a major cartel. Born in the United States but operating deep within Mexico's narco wars, Valdez earned a reputation for brutality, cunning, and an uncanny ability to navigate both sides of the border. His story is a chilling example of how crime, violence, and corruption transcend national lines, and how the lure of power and wealth can corrupt even those born into opportunity. Edgar Valdez Villarreal was born on August 11, 1973, in Laredo, Texas, a border town where American and Mexican cultures blend seamlessly. He was the third of 5 children in a middle-class family. His nickname, La Barbie, came from his fair skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair, which made him stand out among his peers and reportedly reminded Mexican drug traffickers of the iconic Ken doll. In his youth, Valdez was a promising high school football player. He played linebacker for United High School in Laredo and was popular among his classmates. Yet, despite his athletic talent, he showed signs of trouble early on. Teachers described him as charismatic but disruptive, and he reportedly began selling marijuana before he graduated. After high school, he briefly attended college, but soon dropped out. With limited job prospects and an appetite for wealth and risk, Valdez turned to drug dealing full-time. His entry into the drug trade was swift and aggressive, and he began by trafficking marijuana across the U.S.-Mexico border into Texas. By the early 2000s, Valdez had moved deeper into Mexico and became involved with the Beltran-Leyva cartel, one of the most powerful criminal organizations at the time. The cartel was an offshoot of the Sinaloa cartel, and Valdez quickly gained favor with its leaders due to his cross-border experience, organizational skills, and ruthless enforcement methods. His ability to speak English and Spanish fluently, along with his American citizenship, made him particularly valuable. He could travel with ease between the U.S. and Mexico and was often used as a bridge between cartel interests and American drug distribution networks. Valdez rose rapidly, eventually becoming one of the Beltran-Leyva cartel's chief enforcers. He was responsible for overseeing drug shipments and ensuring loyalty through fear. He founded and led a violent faction known as Los Negros, a private army tasked with assassinations, kidnappings, and intimidation. Los Negros became notorious for their paramilitary tactics and their open warfare against rival cartels and Mexican security forces. La Barbie was not just a businessman, he was a warlord. His tactics were designed to instill fear. Beheadings, torture, and public executions became hallmarks of his operations. He reportedly recorded the torture and execution of enemies on video and used these recordings to send messages to rivals or traitors. These videos sometimes leaked to the press or social media, further boosting his fearsome reputation. His rivalry with other cartels, particularly the Zetas, another brutal criminal organization made up of former military members, helped escalate Mexico's drug war in the mid to late 2000s. The violence in cities like Acapulco, Monterrey, and Cuernavaca reached new heights during this period, with La Barbie often blamed for high-profile killings and mass graves. Despite his criminal activities, Valdez flaunted his wealth and lifestyle. He threw lavish parties, drove luxury cars, and lived in multi-million-dollar homes. At times, he courted media attention, reportedly speaking to journalists and even maintaining communication with U.S. contacts. By 2010, Valdez had become a high-priority target for both U.S. and Mexican authorities. The Beltran Leyva cartel had fractured following the death of its leader, Arturo Beltran Leyva, in a shootout with Mexican Marines in December 2009. A bloody power struggle ensued, and La Barbie was in the center of it. Valdez tried to seize control of the cartel after Arturo's death, but his ambitions made him many enemies. Internal betrayals and mounting pressure from law enforcement eventually led to his downfall. On August 30, 2010, Mexican federal police captured Edgar Valdez Villarreal near Mexico City. He was taken into custody without a shot being fired. Photos of his arrest, in which he smiled confidently for the cameras in a pink polo shirt, made international headlines and reinforced his image as both a criminal mastermind and a media-savvy figure. At the time of his arrest, he was facing numerous charges in Mexico and was also wanted in the United States for drug trafficking, money laundering, and other crimes. After nearly 6 years in Mexican custody, Valdez was extradited to the United States in January 2016. He was charged in several U.S. jurisdictions, including Georgia and Louisiana, with conspiring to distribute thousands of kilograms of cocaine and for his role in running a criminal enterprise. In 2018, he pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges, including conspiring to import and distribute cocaine and conspiring to launder money. During his plea, prosecutors detailed how Valdez operated one of the largest cocaine distribution networks between Mexico and the U.S., moving shipments through Laredo and Atlanta. In June 2018, he was sentenced to 49 years in federal prison and ordered to forfeit $192 million, the estimated value of the drugs he trafficked. He is currently incarcerated in a federal prison in the U.S., serving out his sentence under high security. Edgar Valdez Villarreal's story is unusual in the annals of drug trafficking. As an American citizen who became a cartel boss in Mexico, he is a rare case of cross-border criminal success and failure. His dual identity allowed him to exploit both sides of the border, but ultimately also led to his capture and conviction. La Barbie became a symbol of the modern drug war, a ruthless operator who mixed brutality with business acumen and media manipulation. His story has been featured in documentaries, books, and news specials as a case study in how American and Mexican criminal worlds can merge. His rise and fall also highlight the corruption and weaknesses in both Mexican law enforcement and political systems, many of which enabled figures like Valdez to thrive. The life of Edgar Valdez Villarreal, La Barbie, is a stark reminder of how charisma, intelligence, and ambition can be twisted into a force for destruction when combined with greed and violence. From a Texas high school football star to one of the most feared drug lords in Mexico, Valdez's trajectory is both fascinating and tragic. His downfall brought temporary relief to war-torn regions of Mexico, but the criminal networks he helped build continue to impact lives on both sides of the border. Number 2. The Life and Crimes of Jimmy Chagra. Jimmy Chagra was a gambler, drug smuggler, and playboy who rose to infamy in the 1970s as one of the wealthiest and most flamboyant marijuana traffickers in the United States. His life reads like a crime thriller, complete with casino high-rolling, courtroom drama, international smuggling operations, and even the assassination of a federal judge. At the height of his power, Chagra lived large, but his criminal empire eventually unraveled, leaving behind a legacy of scandal and violence that shook the U.S. justice system. Born on December 7, 1944, in El Paso, Texas, Jamiel Alexander Chagra was one of several children in a Lebanese-American family. His father, a hard-working merchant, expected his sons to contribute to the family business, but Jimmy had different aspirations. While his brothers pursued careers in law, one becoming a prominent defense attorney, Jimmy gravitated toward gambling and risk-taking from an early age. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Jimmy had built a reputation as a high-stakes gambler in Las Vegas. But it wasn't just cards and dice that interested him. Chagra soon discovered the immense profits in marijuana smuggling, particularly from Mexico into the southwestern United States. Chagra's transition into drug trafficking began in the early 1970s, capitalizing on El Paso's proximity to the U.S.-Mexico border. He forged connections with powerful suppliers in Mexico and organized sophisticated smuggling routes that transported massive quantities of marijuana into the U.S., often using trucks, small aircraft, and hidden compartments. He earned the nickname the Marijuana King of the Western World due to the sheer scale of his operation. At its peak, Chagra's organization reportedly moved tens of thousands of pounds of marijuana at a time, raking in millions of dollars. His wealth and charm allowed him to cultivate an extravagant lifestyle filled with luxury cars, gambling trips to Vegas, private jets, and lavish parties. Chagra also developed a reputation as one of the most prolific gamblers in Las Vegas history. He was known to wager hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single night, earning the respect and wariness of casino owners. According to some reports, he once lost over $1 million in one sitting. Despite his notoriety, Chagra remained somewhat untouchable for a time. He surrounded himself with powerful friends, bribed corrupt officials, and used his wealth to insulate himself from legal consequences. But his luck began to run out in the late 1970s when federal authorities intensified their efforts to prosecute major drug traffickers. By 1978, Chagra was facing serious trouble. He had been indicted on multiple drug trafficking charges, and his trial was assigned to U.S. District Judge John H. Wood, Jr., known as Maximum John, for his harsh sentencing of drug offenders. Chagra, fearing he would receive a life sentence from Wood, began to explore desperate measures. On May 29, 1979, Judge Wood was shot and killed outside his home in San Antonio, Texas, the first assassination of a federal judge in U.S. history. The killing sent shockwaves through the legal system and triggered one of the largest investigations ever conducted by the FBI. At first, there were few solid leads, but over time, evidence began to point to Chagra. Authorities suspected he had paid for the hit in an attempt to avoid trial. The investigation eventually revealed that Chagra had allegedly hired Charles Harrelson, a known hitman and the father of actor Woody Harrelson, to carry out the assassination. Harrelson was later convicted and sentenced to 2 life terms for his role in the killing. Chagra's own involvement in the plot was more difficult to prove. He was initially acquitted of murder charges in the Wood assassination in 1982, thanks in part to the skillful defense mounted by his brother, lawyer Joe Chagra. However, he was convicted of drug trafficking and other charges and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Later, in a series of plea deals and confessions, Chagra admitted to having paid Harrelson $250,000 to kill Judge Wood, confirming what many had long suspected. His brother Joe, who had knowledge of the plot but failed to prevent it, was also imprisoned for his role. While incarcerated, Chagra began cooperating with federal authorities in the mid-1880s, offering information on criminal networks and even recording conversations with other inmates as part of ongoing investigations. In exchange for his cooperation, the government eventually released him on parole in 2003 after he had served more than 20 years behind bars. In his later years, Chagra lived under an assumed name, seeking to escape the notoriety of his past. He settled briefly in Arizona and then in the Pacific Northwest, living quietly with his second wife, away from the spotlight he had once sought so avidly. Despite his release, the consequences of his actions rippled through the years. The murder of Judge Wood fundamentally changed how the federal judiciary handled security, and the case became a symbol of the growing danger posed by drug cartels and organized crime. Jimmy Chagra died of cancer on July 25, 2008, at the age of 63 in Mesa, Arizona. By the time of his death, his once glamorous life had faded into obscurity, remembered by few outside law enforcement, legal historians, and the gambling circles of old Las Vegas. Chagra's life remains a cautionary tale of ambition gone awry. He was a man of immense charisma and intelligence who could have succeeded in legitimate business, but instead chose the perilous path of organized crime. His legacy is inextricably linked to the only assassination of a federal judge in the 20th century, an act that shocked the nation and forever altered the judicial landscape. The story of Jimmy Chagra is more than a tale of crime. It is a story about excess, desperation, and the price of living outside the law. From the casinos of Las Vegas to the deserts of Texas and the courtrooms of justice, Chagra's journey mirrors the rise and fall of America's early drug kingpins. His life touched on themes of loyalty, betrayal, and the far-reaching impact of criminal ambition. Ultimately, Chagra left behind a legacy not just of drugs and violence, but also of legal reform, as the federal government was forced to rethink its approach to protecting judges and prosecuting high-profile criminal cases. His name, once whispered in fear or awe, now serves as a stark reminder of how one man's decisions can alter the course of history. Number 1. The life and crimes of Juan Raul Garza. Juan Raul Garza, born in 1956 in Brownsville, Texas, rose from modest beginnings to become one of the most feared drug traffickers in South Texas during the late 1980s and early 1990s. His life was characterized by a sharp descent from a once promising businessman and family man to a ruthless criminal whose activities would eventually earn him a place in history as one of the first individuals executed by the federal government after the reinstatement of the federal death penalty in 1988. Garza was born into a working-class family and raised along the U.S.-Mexico border, a region where many residents share cultural and familial ties across both sides. In his early adulthood, Garza appeared to be on a respectable path. He established himself as a successful businessman in the Rio Grande Valley. Reports suggest he operated several legitimate enterprises, including a trucking company, which eventually became a key component in his smuggling operations. By all appearances, Garza lived a comfortable life, supporting his wife and 3 children. However, beneath the surface of his public image, Garza began cultivating a criminal enterprise that would grow into a violent and far-reaching drug trafficking network. In the late 1980s, Garza transitioned fully into the drug trade, taking advantage of his location near the Mexican border to establish connections with powerful drug cartels in Mexico. His organization smuggled large quantities of marijuana into the United States, particularly targeting distribution hubs throughout the Midwest. Garza's trucking business served as a front for transporting drugs from Matamoros, Mexico, through Brownsville, Texas, and further into states like Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois. At the height of his operations, federal authorities estimate that Garza and his network smuggled thousands of pounds of marijuana into the U.S. His criminal empire grew rapidly, and with it, so did his paranoia and brutality. Garza's cartel-like behavior included tightly controlled logistics, bribes to local officials, and the use of intimidation and violence to maintain order and discipline within his ranks. Garza's downfall would be marked not just by drug smuggling, but by a series of murders that exposed the depth of his criminality. According to court records, Garza personally ordered or was involved in the killing of at least 3 individuals between 1990 and 1991. These murders were carried out to protect his interests and enforce discipline within his organization. One of the victims was Thomas Rumbo, a former associate whom Garza suspected of skimming profits. Another was Gilberto Matos, who was believed to be cooperating with law enforcement. The third, Erasmo Luna, was murdered in Mexico under Garza's orders as punishment for stealing from the organization. The killings were cold, calculated, and carried out with the clear intention of sending a message. Witnesses later testified that Garza showed no remorse and was explicit in his directives to eliminate perceived threats. These acts of violence drew the attention of the federal government, which was increasingly prioritizing the dismantling of violent drug trafficking organizations. In 1992, federal agents arrested Juan Raul Garza and charged him with multiple offenses, including drug trafficking and murder in furtherance of a continuing criminal enterprise, a federal capital offense. The trial, held in Texas, laid bare the inner workings of Garza's criminal network. Prosecutors presented a strong case that Garza not only ran a multi-million-dollar drug empire, but also used murder as a tool of his trade. The testimony of former associates, alongside physical and forensic evidence, painted a damning portrait. The jury found Garza guilty on multiple counts, including the 3 murders. In 1993, Garza was sentenced to death under the Federal Death Penalty Act of 1988, which allows for capital punishment in cases involving murder tied to large-scale drug enterprises. During his time on death row at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, Garza maintained a relatively low profile. His appeals focused on the constitutionality of the death penalty and whether the federal government had adequately considered mitigating factors in his case. One key issue raised by Garza's defense was racial bias in the application of the federal death penalty. Garza, a Mexican-American, was one of the few people of Hispanic descent to face execution under federal law at the time. His case drew attention from civil rights organizations and religious leaders who appealed to President Bill Clinton to commute his sentence. In response to these concerns, President Clinton issued a temporary moratorium on federal executions in 2000 to allow for further review. However, following a Justice Department study and legal reviews, the execution was allowed to proceed. Juan Raul Garza was executed by lethal injection on June 19, 2001. He was the second person to be executed by the federal government since 1963, following Timothy McVeigh just days earlier. Garza's final statement included expressions of remorse and religious reflection. He acknowledged his wrongdoing and asked for forgiveness. His execution marked a turning point in the federal government's approach to capital punishment. While McVeigh's execution had drawn massive media coverage due to the Oklahoma City bombing, Garza's case raised deeper questions about how the federal justice system handles drug-related capital cases and the racial and geographic disparities in death penalty sentencing. The life of Juan Raul Garza is a stark illustration of how ambition and greed can spiral into violence and destruction. From a seemingly respectable businessman to a drug kingpin responsible for multiple murders, Garza's transformation underscores the human cost of the drug trade along the U.S.-Mexico border. His case serves as a cautionary tale and a historical milestone. It forced national conversations around the federal death penalty, the war on drugs, and how justice is administered across racial and socioeconomic lines. Garza's name is now permanently etched into U.S. legal history, not only for his crimes, but also for the legal and moral debates his case helped ignite.